What if cheating didn't start with a kiss, but with a conversation no one ever saw?
Not a moment, but a slow shift you didn't notice until it was already too late.
And the most disturbing part?
It could happen to anyone, even in a happy marriage. There's something about cheating in marriage that people don't like to talk about honestly.
Because it's uncomfortable?
No, because deep down, I think we all want to believe it's simple, that it only happens to other people, that it starts with a clear decision, a moment you can point to and say, that's where everything broke.
And you don't believe that anymore?
I used to. I really did. I thought cheating was a line you either crossed or you didn't. Clean, obvious, almost predictable. But the more I paid attention to real stories, the more that idea started to fall apart.
What kind of stories?
The kind where nothing looked wrong at the beginning. No big fights, no dramatic unhappiness, just two people living their lives. Married, stable, normal. And then, somehow, something shifts.
Without anyone noticing?
That's the disturbing part. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's quiet, almost invisible.
So, it doesn't feel like cheating at first.
Exactly. It doesn't feel like betrayal. It feels like a conversation, a moment of connection, something small that doesn't seem like it matters.
Until it does?
Yeah, until it becomes something you start hiding, something you think about more than you should, something that slowly takes up space, where something else used to be.
That's a very different way of looking at it.
It is, and honestly, it made me uncomfortable when I first started seeing it that way, because it raises a question I wasn't ready for.
Which is?
What if cheating doesn't begin with an action, but with a feeling
That's harder to define.
and harder to judge? Because feelings don't have clear boundaries, they don't come with warnings.
So, now you're not just asking, what is cheating? You're asking, how does it actually begin?
Yeah, and maybe more importantly, why people don't stop when they still can.
That's the part people avoid.
Because it forces you to look at things you might not want to admit. Not just about relationships, but about human behavior.
Or about yourself.
Exactly.
So, where does this conversation start?
Not at the moment everything falls apart, but much earlier, in the space where nothing looks wrong yet, but something already is.
That's a dangerous space.
It is. Because it feels safe. It feels harmless. And that's exactly why people stay there longer than they should.
All right. I'm curious now.
Me too. And if you're listening, welcome to MTP, MindTalk Podcast,
Let's talk about the part of cheating no one really sees.
the part that happens before anyone calls it cheating at all. If cheating doesn't begin where we think it does, then maybe we've been defining it too late.
Too late?
Yeah. Because most people only recognize cheating when it becomes undeniable. When there's proof. Something physical. Something that can't be explained away.
So, we wait for the moment it's obvious.
Exactly. And by then, it's already gone much further than anyone wants to admit.
So, what are we missing before that point?
I think we miss the quieter changes. The ones that don't look serious on the surface but feel different if you pay attention.
Like what?
Like when someone starts giving a part of themselves to someone outside the marriage, but tells themselves it's harmless.
You mean emotional attention?
Yeah. Time, focus, curiosity. The kind of energy that used to belong inside the relationship, slowly shifting somewhere else.
But that's hard to label because nothing wrong has technically happened.
That's the problem. We rely too much on technical definitions. We ask, did anything physical happen? Instead of asking, what changed?
And those are two very different questions.
Completely different, because a relationship doesn't break in one moment. It changes over time.
So you're saying cheating might not start with a decision, but with a shift.
Exactly. A shift in where someone feels understood, a shift in who they open up to, a shift in what they keep private.
Privacy versus secrecy.
That's a big one. Everyone needs privacy. But secrecy feels different. It comes with tension, with hesitation.
With that feeling that you shouldn't have to explain it, but you also don't want to.
Right. And when that feeling shows up consistently, something deeper is happening,
Even if the person doesn't want to admit it yet.
especially then, because denial makes everything easier in the short term.
But more complicated later.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people stay in that space longer than they realize. Not because they're trying to hurt someone, but because they're trying to avoid confronting something uncomfortable,
Like what?
like dissatisfaction, or disconnection, or even just the realization that something important is missing.
And instead of facing it directly, they look somewhere else without fully acknowledging why.
Yeah. And that's where things quietly begin, not with a clear intention to betray, but with a gradual movement away from honesty.
Which makes it harder to see, but more important to understand.
Because if we only focus on the moment everything becomes visible, we miss the part where it could have been understood earlier.
So maybe cheating isn't just about crossing a line.
Maybe it's about how close you're willing to get to that line without stepping back. And if people don't step back when they're close to that line, then something deeper is already pulling them forward.
So this isn't really about the moment itself. It's about what's happening underneath.
Yeah. And the more I think about it, the more I realize that cheating in marriage often has less to do with desire and more to do with something missing that no one fully acknowledged.
Missing in what sense?
Not always something dramatic. Sometimes it's just the slow loss of feeling understood. Like you're still there, still present, but not really seen the way you used to be.
That kind of emotional distance doesn't always get talked about.
Because it's hard to explain. There's no clear event, no obvious problem, just a quiet shift in how two people experience each other.
And when that space grows, it creates room for something else.
Exactly. And when someone new steps into that space, even in a small way, it can feel significant. Not because they're better, but because they're different.
Different how?
They listen without history. They respond without assumptions. They notice things that might have been overlooked for a long time.
So it's not about replacing someone, it's about feeling something again.
That's what makes it complicated. Because from the inside, it doesn't feel like betrayal at first. It feels like relief.
Relief from what?
From feeling unnoticed. From feeling predictable. From feeling like a version of yourself that no longer feels alive.
That's a strong statement.
It is. But I think a lot of people don't cheat because they suddenly stop caring about their partner. They cheat because they stop feeling like themselves within the relationship.
And that's a very different problem.
Yeah. And it's harder to confront because it requires honesty, not just with your partner, but with yourself.
What about validation? That seems to play a role too.
It does. People need to feel chosen, not just once, but continuously. And over time, in a long marriage, that feeling can fade into routine.
Not because love disappears, but because it becomes familiar.
Right. And familiarity is stable, but it's not always exciting. So when someone new shows interest, even in a subtle way, it can feel unexpectedly powerful.
Because it brings back a feeling that was missing.
Exactly. And instead of questioning why that feeling disappeared in the first place, people sometimes hold on to the new one.
Even if it creates a conflict.
Especially then, because now there are two emotional realities happening at the same time.
one rooted in commitment and one rooted in experience.
And navigating that without clarity is where things start to get complicated.
And probably where most people lose their sense of direction.
Yeah. Not because they don't know what's right, but because they don't fully understand what they're feeling. And when people don't fully understand what they're feeling, that's usually when their actions start to drift in ways they never expected.
So, this is where it moves from internal confusion into real life choices.
Yeah. And those choices don't always look dramatic. That's what makes them so easy to overlook.
Give me a situation.
Imagine someone in a long marriage. Nothing is clearly broken. They respect each other. They've built a life together. But if you look closer, something feels distant.
Not enough to leave, but enough to feel it.
Exactly. And then one day they meet someone who asks questions differently, listens a little more closely, responds in a way that feels present,
And that small difference stands out.
more than it should, or at least more than they expected. So they keep talking,
Still thinking it's harmless,
right? Because from the outside, it is. It's just conversation. No lines crossed, no obvious mistake.
but internally, something is shifting.
Yeah. They start looking forward to those conversations, not because they plan to, but because it feels easy.
Easier than what they have at home.
That's the part they don't say out loud, but they feel it. And instead of asking why that difference exists, they stay in the new space
Because it feels better.
because it feels lighter. And for a while, they convince themselves that it doesn't mean anything.
Until they notice they're holding back information.
Exactly. They don't mention certain conversations. They avoid certain details. Not because they're hiding something big, but because they don't want to explain something they can't fully justify.
And that's when the conflict begins.
Not between two people, but within one person. Because now they're aware of the gap between what they're doing and what they believe is right. And they're stuck in that space. Yeah. Another situation is even quieter. Someone isn't actively looking for anything, they're just tired, emotionally drained, going through routines without much reflection,
And then someone shows up at the right moment.
or the wrong one. Someone who notices that tiredness and responds to it.
And suddenly they feel understood again.
And that feeling can be hard to walk away from, not because it's more important, but because it feels immediate.
And real.
Yeah. And now they're holding on to something that exists outside their marriage, while still staying inside it.
That sounds like a difficult place to be.
It is. Because there's no clear moment where everything changes. Just a series of moments where they could have stepped back, but didn't.
So the question isn't when did it happen?
It's when did they stop choosing differently? And once you start asking when someone stopped choosing differently, it becomes harder to see cheating as just one moment.
Because it turns into a pattern instead.
Yeah. A pattern of small decisions that don't feel significant on their own, but slowly change the direction of a relationship.
And by the time people recognize it, it already feels too late.
That's what I keep coming back to. Not the outcome, but the accumulation, the quiet moments where something could have been acknowledged, but wasn't.
So maybe the real issue isn't just the act of cheating.
I don't think it is. I think it's the absence of awareness before things reach that point,
Awareness of what exactly?
of emotional distance, of unmet needs, of the subtle ways people stop showing up for each other and don't talk about it.
That requires a different kind of honesty.
It does, because it's easier to react to something obvious than it is to notice something gradual.
And even harder to admit it.
Exactly. Because admitting it means accepting that something important has been missing for a while, not just something that suddenly went wrong.
So the focus shifts from blame to understanding.
That's where I think this conversation matters most. Not in deciding who's right or wrong, but in recognizing patterns that people tend to ignore,
Patterns that don't look dangerous at first.
but become difficult to undo later. And maybe if more people paid attention to those early signs, fewer situations would reach a breaking point.
So this is less about judgment and more about awareness.
Yeah, because awareness doesn't fix everything, but it changes how people respond,
It gives them a chance to pause.
to reflect, to ask questions earlier, to notice what they're feeling before those feelings turn into actions they can't take back.
That sounds simple, but it's not easy.
No, it's not. Because it requires people to be honest about things they might not fully understand yet.
Or things they've been avoiding.
Exactly. But maybe that's where real change starts. Not in the moment everything falls apart, but in the moment, someone is willing to look at what's quietly shifting.
So, if someone is listening right now, what do you hope they take away from this?
Not a rule, not a definition, just a different way of paying attention.
To themselves and to their relationships.
Yeah. Because the earlier you notice something, the more choices you still have.
And once those choices are gone, things become much harder.
Exactly. So if this conversation made you think about something in your own life, or helped you see a situation differently,
We'd really like to hear your perspective
not to argue, not to judge, just to understand how other people see this.
because there isn't one clear answer.
Just different experiences and different moments where people could have chosen differently.
And if you want more conversations like this,
Honest, thoughtful, and a little uncomfortable,
you can follow along.
we'll keep asking the questions most people try to avoid.
When I think about everything we've talked about, I don't see cheating in marriage as a single moment anymore. It feels more like a process, something that slowly forms in the space where people stop paying attention to what really matters.
Yeah, not one big mistake, but a series of smaller ones that seem harmless at the time.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes it so difficult because most people don't notice those small shifts. They don't realize when communication becomes surface level, when emotional connection starts fading, or when they begin to hold things back instead of sharing them.
And by the time they see it clearly, it's already gone further than they expected.
Right. So maybe the real takeaway isn't about labeling something as right or wrong, but about learning to recognize those early signs, the moments when something feels slightly off, even if you can't explain why.
That awareness changes everything.
It does. Because when you notice early, you still have choices. You can pause, you can reflect, you can talk about what's missing before it turns into something bigger.
Before it becomes something you can't easily undo.
And I think that's the most important part. Not being perfect, but being present, being honest, being willing to face uncomfortable truths instead of avoiding them.
That takes effort.
It does, but it's worth it. So here's a simple question for you. Do you think cheating starts with an action or with a feeling? I'd really like to hear your perspective. Feel free to share it in the comments so everyone can learn from different points of view.
Yeah, we're curious what you think.
And if you find conversations like this helpful, honest, thoughtful, and maybe a little uncomfortable in a good way, please consider subscribing to MTP MindTalk Podcast. It really helps support the channel and gives us the motivation to keep creating more meaningful content like this.
It means a lot to us.
Thank you for being here, for listening, and for thinking with us. We'll see you in the next episode.